I believe we have a talk about how looking to 2024, but it's with Chartboost. Chartboost, long-time supporters of Pocket Gamer Connect, so we're very pleased to welcome to the stage Alasdair Pressney. Is that you out there? Alasdair, come up to the stage. Round of applause for Alasdair.
So my name is Alasdair Pressney. I'm with Chartboost, and I'm a senior product manager for publisher products, and I focus on Chartboost mediation. But in addition to that, work on Evergreen initiative as well. I'm here to talk about the transition from Waterfall to bidding, the pros and cons of each, what's different about them, and what the future may hold. So, see agenda. Let's start with what Waterfall looks like. So in a Waterfall, what happens is a mediation platform, which would be us, requests ads from monetization SDKs one at a time. So you can see in this visual here, request to a placement, which is a location inside an app where ads are shown. And then you can see this list of what's called line items in a waterfall, and those basically represent different price points in mediation. And the way a waterfall works is we go down the list in order of price. So we go to the first provider and we say, hey, do you have an ad? They say yes or no. And then we go to the second provider, hey, do you have an ad? Yes or no. And we keep going down that list until we get to a point where somebody says yes. At that point, we will show their ad. So what are the pros and cons of Waterfall? So the biggest thing that publishers like about a waterfall is transparency over the price. You have all these different line items, and for each of those line items, you can see how many impressions are delivered, what the fill rate is, how many, what the render rate was, the CPM, the revenue. Everything is right there, and you get an entire breakdown of what your revenue looks like inside your supply by price, and that's great for publishers. There's some issues, though, with Waterfall, some things that are technical challenges that the industry needs to address. The biggest one is latency, and the reason latency is an issue is because of what I just described. We are going one by one into each line item saying, hey, do you have an ad? Yes or no. Next one, yes or no. Each time we do that, we're pinging a server, and it's a round trip. We go all the way to that server and all the way back, and those add up over time. So I think with Chartboost mediation, our timeout is around half a second, but for waterfalls, sometimes these waterfalls can have up to 70 line items in there, so you can imagine this really adds up. That could be up to 35 seconds of latency before you get a request in which an ad is actually available. And so publishers have a challenge to maximize the number of impressions they show per session. We call that ImpDAU, the number of impressions per daily active user. Tends to be a little bit lower when you're in a waterfall. A part of all those round trips and latency is also cost and inefficiencies in the system, right? So like any other system, if you have higher costs, those costs get passed on through the ecosystem as well. And so that doesn't change when we're talking about Waterfall. Some of the shared by publishers here too, so you might not be getting the best price just because of the inefficiencies involved. And the third thing is there's a lot of active maintenance required for waterfalls. I met a lot of publishers today who have the best waterfall. I've seen some really impressive systems where publishers different waterfalls, they'll bucket them by country, they'll bucket those countries by price. Sometimes they have advanced ways of doing the pricing mechanisms, really impressive stuff, but all of that takes effort. So, what is bidding? In bidding, what happens is we request an ad to a placement, and simultaneously all the bidders respond at once. And in bidding, the highest partner wins. So we get the highest price straight away without having to do all that back and forth. So what are the pros and cons of bidding? So the first one is, of course, right? Instead of having multiple requests back and forth, there's just one. The other really good thing about bidding is it's a standard system for buying and selling traffic. So bidding is based off of a spec that's designed by called the OpenRTB. Open real-time bidding, and it's a standard way of transacting ads which means that more providers work with bidding than they do with traditional waterfalls and mobile apps. There's several DSPs out there that are maybe not mobile specific, but maybe serve to desktop or web, and those bidders get access to your inventory, your app inventory through bidding because it is more standardized and interoperable. And a big pro is it could be fully automated. You don't have to manage long lines of waterfalls. You set up a single line, and you get the best price you can. However, the con is you don't get the breakout of price in specific line items. Everything is kind of consolidated into average figures and numbers, and so you have less control, visibility over your price, and publishers don't like that. So the reality is a little different from what I just showed you. The reality is publishers do both. They have bidding line items, and they combine that with a waterfall. The way that works at Chartboost mediation is we will request a bid, and we will take that highest bid, and then we will slot it into its appropriate place in the waterfall. So for example, if the winning bid is $25, that means it would go to the top. If the winning bid were $12, which in this case it isn't, it would go 6 or 7 slots down. So what happens is when you're bidding, you inherit some of the latency issues in a waterfall, but you could also have an opportunity to show the highest price and kind of skip that latency issue if that is the winning bid at that price. So most publishers tend to like this approach because they get the best of both worlds. But again, you are inheriting the latency issues that are inherent in a waterfall structure. So something that's really interesting, something we tried to test with a publisher recently was what happens if you try to use a waterfall but specify the price ahead of time. So what the publisher was trying to do here was say, hey, I know there's latency issues. I don't want to go line item by line item and figure out what the best price is. What I want to do instead is I want to manage a waterfall. I want to see the price, but I don't want to have latency. And so what this publisher did was really interesting. All publishers, or most publishers nowadays, they have an understanding of how valuable their users are. So, like the LTV of their users, the expected return they're going to get, or they can look at previous, how those users won or received ads in the past, and they can use it to drive, on how they might receive ads in the future. So, for example, a user was shown an ad at a $25 CPM in the past. Maybe it's likely they'll have a ad in the future. So this publisher did exactly that. They said, hey, we've seen this user at $25. So instead of going through the entire waterfall, instead what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, since we've seen this user at $25, we're going to channel them directly to that $25 line item and only that $25 line item. Or in this case, in this example, in the visual here, you see $17. So the same mechanism at $17. And so what we saw was quite interesting in this test. More impressions per daily active user. Load time went way down. The load rate went up because it doesn't take as long to load an ad. And ARPDAU went up. So shown efficient than just calling a specific. The CPM did go down is because we were not getting for a user. On it, that was it. Go to the next one. The reason for that was because we didn't really have a mechanism to go to the next line in the waterfall. Thank you. So, yeah, okay. So, really interesting results. Waterfalls can be useful, but to an extent. The issue with this, though, is it requires publishers to build an analytics and segmentation engine that drives the price, and that's also a lot of effort. So where are we headed? I think we're headed to a world where publishers invest further in bidding, but do so in a way that I just described, where they define the price of a user, but put it through a bidding mechanism so that you have multiple providers instead of just one provider that respond to an ad. I also think that these player analytics and segmentation engines might not come from the publisher, but they might come from the platforms that you already work with. After all, they already know about the ROAS of users when they're buying traffic, so if you're working with a mediator who is also your demand provider, they could use that same technology to drive price point information on the supply side. So what's good about this? Well, you get a price for every user, but you get the right price for every user, and you don't have latency, and you're the one who's defining the price, so you know what that price is. So you get the best of both worlds, and you don't have to manage a waterfall anymore. So I think this is the first prediction. I think if bidding is able to solve for pricing, transparency, and control, I think we're going to see a lot more adoption bidding, and we're going to see some technologies in the next year or two that are going to try and solve this problem. The second prediction is a little more hidden, though, and it refers to what I mentioned earlier about interoperability. If you remember, I said DSPs before could come from the web space. They could be mobile focused, but basically they're all buying and selling through a standardized framework. And I think that's going to have some benefits for publishers in the creative sphere. So before I explain this, I'm going to explain something that happened about 5 years ago. So how many of you in the room are familiar with viewability SDKs and the OM SDK? We've got some hands in the back. Those are my colleagues. That's a cheat. I'll explain it. So in the brand world, brand buyers really care about whether their ads are seen by a user or not, and to what extent are they seen. And so what happened about 5 years ago is we had a bunch of viewability vendors, each with their own SDK, and each of those SDKs had their own way of measuring viewability. And so publishers who wanted brand demand had to integrate all those various providers because some brands work with one provider, others work with another provider. What that resulted in was technical redundancy. So you have multiple SDKs that do the same thing. What does that sound like? Well, to me, it sounds like rendering. If you think about the way that your monetization stack works today, you have a mediation platform that manages multiple ads SDKs, and each of those ads SDKs has their own rendering engine. The creatives that are shown in the app are different depending on the provider, and publishers don't have much control over the creatives. I think this will take a bit longer than the first prediction, but I think in the next 5 years or so, I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation in how creatives are rendered, and I think we're going to see a standardized framework supported by bidding and specs developed by the OpenRTB that allow for publishers to have a single rendering SDK that works for all providers, which would thereby allow publishers to simplify their tech stack and have less SDKs. And in fact, this has already started. So you can see in the bottom of this slide, there's 2 links down here. The bottom one is for the OM SDK, which is the viewability framework I just described to you. And the top link is Shark. Shark is the spec that the IAB is working on to build this framework. And the thing I really like about this is it puts publishers back in control of their creative experience. It says, hey, we have a common way of rendering ads, and we can give publishers settings that determine how those demand providers show their ads, which gives a more unified experience, a better experience, and an experience you can control. Thank you very much.
Hi. So with hybrid versus bidding versus waterfall, do you feel like to get the most competition and the highest CPM, let's say, you need all networks to be bidders instead of the hybrid, or is it actually like there's communication between the two and there's actually an optimal competition available?
So the demand providers who focus on waterfall are usually different from the demand providers that focus on bidding. There is an overlap, but if you look at the list of company names for the one or the other, I would estimate there's about a 20% overlap overall. So it's a different mix of demand providers. Most of the SDK demand providers that you see today are making that transition from waterfall to bidding. And the main reason for that is the efficiency reasons that I called out. And if you think about a waterfall, some providers may not get access to the full list of users that an app has. Well, they want access to those users, right? So they're making that transition for their own reasons as well. So the industry is still, there's a lot of inertia in this change too. Like I said, publishers really like price controls. And also on the demand side, they're used to being, to bidding, or not bidding, but showing their demand into a waterfall. So they have to make some changes on their end too. But I do expect most of your providers in the future are going to be bidders. We've already seen some significant changes from key providers like Google in the past year or so, where they've shut down their waterfall side and they're really starting to ramp up their bidding side.
That's interesting. Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Well, we've got Alasdair for a few minutes actually. So if we've got any questions from the audience. So tell me a little bit about what you're hoping to get from here at Pocket Gamer Connects. Are you looking to meet publishers, basically? Is that your ideal meeting?
We are very excited to meet publishers who are interested in working with Chartboost as our ads SDK or our mediation SDK. And I think we also have someone from our DSP team here in the audience. So if you're interested in working with us on the UA side too, we're interested in chatting with you there.
That's great. Have you seen it in the other panels so far this afternoon on the monetization track here?
I've been so busy with meetings, I
I know,
haven't had a chance to. Hopefully tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, thank you very much. And we'll have a round of applause for Alasdair. Thank you.